Despite amendments to the U.S. Constitution enacted after the Civil War, granting full citizenship and the right to vote to the recently freed slaves, Black Americans could not exercise their new civil liberties easily. America's racial bias would not die quickly. Laws passed, mostly in southern states, allowed for legal discrimination and the segregation of blacks. Fair access to housing, economic opportunity, and voting was curtailed by legislation known as Jim Crow laws. By the 1950s, growing dissatisfaction with the status quo would boil over, and many African Americans engaged in protest and civil disobedience to bring attention to their cause. These actions, combined with the passionate and persuasive arguments of their leaders, would eventually force the government's hand. The Civil Rights Movement led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, banning discrimination based on race, color, sex, or national origin. But the resistance to the changes these federal laws would mandate was still fierce in many areas of the U.S. Sometimes the federal government needed to send law enforcement officials or even the military to support efforts at desegregation. While there has been progress in the last 50 years, African Americans and other minority groups must remain vigilant to ensure they receive the opportunities that the majority take for granted. By the mid-20th century, the work of a very few Black artists began to receive some mainstream attention. These artists addressed the Black experience in contemporary American society by celebrating the richness of African American culture. Other Black artists lent their talents to the fight for equal rights, advocating for justice and equality in an overtly political manner. The works of these artists addressed Black stereotypes and the systems that promote white privilege. Some of this work has created controversy even in the Black community for its appropriation of historically racist imagery and confrontational nature. However, there is no denying the truth to power that these artists voice. But ethnicity is only part of one's identity. There are also a great number of American artists of African descent whose work address the themes that are not political. These artists explore a wide range of artistic and aesthetic concerns, participating in and enriching the contemporary art dialogue. While still underrepresented and undervalued in the art market, some artists of color are beginning to become major players in the art world. More and more African American artists have been recipients of major arts awards, are being shown in prestigious exhibitions, and are included in museum collections. The intensity and vision of these artists of color are making their mark on the 21st century.
Sculpture. I started to think about this location in relationship to colonialism and the slave trade, and this work grew out of kind of a long period of researching, thinking, and note-taking.